I've never considered myself paranoid. After all, 35 years in the insurance business taught me one thing. People lie, especially when it comes to money. I'd check insurance claims, and 9 out of 10 contain some kind of lie. Tiny ones, like overcharging for a stolen TV, or huge ones, like staging a house fire for a payout. So when my grandson Thornton suddenly started showing interest in me, the alarm bell rang immediately. I am 67, and for the past 3 years, I have lived alone in my home in Agora Hills. Mabel, my wife, died of pancreatic cancer. Quickly, as is often the case with such a diagnosis. Too fast for me to get used to the idea of life without her. Our house was nothing special, a one-story, three-bedroom ranch house on a quiet street. But the land in the neighborhood is worth a fortune now. We bought it for a pittance in the early 80s when I got promoted. Now, according to the realtors who periodically call with offers to sell, it's worth about $2 million. Sounds like madness. My son Brent married early to a woman named Valerie, and they had Thornton when Brent was only 20. Valerie left when the boy turned 5. Brent always blamed me for the breakdown of his marriage, said I worked too much and didn't help them with the baby. Maybe he was right. I was used to relying on myself for everything, and I expected the same from my son. When Mabel was alive, she kept up a semblance of family relations. Sunday dinners, calling Brent every week, sending Thornton birthday money. After she died, all that stopped. Brent called once a month as a courtesy, and Thornton only showed up on Thanksgiving. And that was unless Pixie, his wife, made up some excuse to go to her parents' house. Pixie. What kind of name is that? She was working as a yoga instructor when they met. Now, for all I knew, she ran some kind of fashion blog and sold cosmetics online. I'd only seen her a few times. Tall, thin, with platinum-dyed hair and lots of tattoos. She looked right through me like I was a piece of furniture. So when Thornton called me in mid-April and asked if he could stop by, I was wary. "Just want to check on you, Grandpa," he said with feigned enthusiasm. "I'm fine," I replied dryly. "Come on, I haven't checked in a while. I'll come by on Saturday, okay?" I agreed, albeit suspiciously. Thornton was 27, and he'd only visited me twice in the last year, both times with Brent, at Christmas and when I'd had a minor heart attack in February. On Saturday, he'd arrived in a new car, a black Lexus that I was sure he couldn't afford. Thornton worked for some technology company, but I knew from Brent that he changed jobs often. Despite all these changes, he always dressed like the cover of a magazine and never missed an opportunity to mention how much his watch or shoes cost. "Grandpa," he hugged me with exaggerated tenderness. He smelled of expensive cologne and faintly of marijuana. "Have you lost weight? You look great." I had lost weight after my heart attack, not because I was following the diet the doctor had prescribed, but because it seemed pointless to cook for myself. I mostly ate frozen dinners and sandwiches. "Come on in," I said, letting him in. Thornton looked around with some new interest, as if assessing the property. His gaze lingered on the antique clock in the living room, the only truly valuable thing I'd inherited from my father. "How's Pixie?" I asked, though I had little interest in that. "Oh, she's fine. Started a new business selling some super exclusive face creams. She says they'll be $500 an ounce. Can you imagine?" I had no idea, and I didn't want to. "What about your job?" I asked, leading him into the kitchen. "You want some coffee?" "Yeah, I'd love some. Work." "Well, actually, I'm joining a new company. It's a startup, very promising. Stocks, options, the whole thing." I nodded, putting the kettle on. It was the third up-and-coming company in the last 2 years, as far as I could remember. Thornton sat down at the kitchen table, tapping his fingers on the countertop. "Listen, Grandpa, I've been wondering how you've been doing around the house since the incident." "The incident?" That's what he called my heart attack. "I'm doing okay," I said. "The doctor says I'm in good shape for my age." Thornton shook his head with feigned concern. "But it's a big house for one person. It's a lot of work, isn't it? Mowing the lawn, cleaning, repairs. I hire a gardener every 2 weeks. I do everything else myself." I put a mug of coffee in front of him. He didn't even say thank you, just added 3 spoonfuls of sugar. He'd always liked sweets, ever since he was a kid. "Have you ever thought about maybe moving somewhere smaller?" He took a sip of coffee. "There are great retirement homes with supervision." You wouldn't be on your own, and all that worrying about the house? I like my house, I interrupted him, and I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. He raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Sure, sure, sure. I'm just saying that sometimes it pays to think ahead, you know? Plan ahead. Something in his voice, in the way he avoided looking me in the eye, made me even more wary. Have you and Pixie thought about buying your own house? I asked casually. Thornton grimaced. Prices are crazy right now. Besides, with this new job, I'd have to wait for things to settle down. He started asking me about my medications, whether I was seeing a doctor regularly, whether I was sleeping well. It was strange. He hadn't been interested in my health before. Then, as if by chance, he asked, "Did you make a will, by the way? After, the incident?" That was it. I felt my insides tighten. It wasn't about my welfare. It was about money. Or, more accurately, my house. I have a will, I said evasively, from when Mabel was alive. But I don't plan on dying anytime soon, if that's what you mean. He laughed strainedly. Of course you don't. I'm just, it's the right thing to have all the papers in order, just in case. After that, he offered to help me with the paperwork, review bills, check insurance, maybe update the will. I politely declined, saying that I had a longtime lawyer I knew who handled all my affairs. That was a lie. I hadn't consulted a lawyer since I bought the house, but something told me not to reveal my cards. When Thornton left, promising to stop by the following week, I sat in my office and thought. His sudden interest, the questions about the house and the will, the new car he clearly couldn't afford. The picture was not a pleasant one. The next day I called Brent. "How's Thornton doing?" I asked him after the usual greetings. "I saw him yesterday driving his new car." Brent was quiet. He and Pixie are having a little financial trouble, to be honest. He lost his job again a month ago, though he told me he quit on his own. And they got the car on a loan at some crazy interest rates. I told him it was a bad idea. But you know Thornton. Yeah, I knew Thornton. The boy always wanted to appear richer and more successful than he really was. What about their apartment? Are they still renting in Sherman Oaks? Actually, they were evicted 2 months ago. They're staying with Pixie's parents now. Thornton didn't tell you? No, of course he didn't. But now I was beginning to understand why he was suddenly interested in my house. After talking to Brent, I decided to see what else my grandson was hiding. Old insurance investigator habits never rust. I knew his full name, date of birth, and social security number. That was enough to start digging. Over the next week, I learned that Thornton had massive credit card debt, more than $50,000, 3 lawsuits from creditors, overdue car payments, and best of all, he was actually working at a new company, but not at a promising startup like he said, but at a call center selling insurance over the phone. The more I learned, the more worried I became. Thornton was desperate, and desperate people, as I knew well from my former job, are capable of desperate acts. As I expected, Thornton called a week later and asked to visit again. This time he brought Pixie with him. She looked even thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes poorly concealed by makeup. Her platinum hair now had pink strands and her arms were covered in more tattoos. "Ruben, it's so nice to see you," she said with a fake smile when I opened the door. She never called me Grandpa, and that was fine with me. They sat in my living room exchanging glances that they thought I didn't notice. Pixie was looking around the room with ill-concealed interest, as if she was already figuring out what she could sell. "How's your new business?" I asked her. "Thornton said you sell face creams?" "Oh yes," she perked up. "It's organic cosmetics, all natural. I'm just looking for investors to expand the line." I nodded, pretending to be interested. "How much do you need to invest?" They looked at each other again. "Well, at least $50,000 to start with," she said. "But with the right investment, the business could grow tenfold in a year." I doubted she had any business at all, other than reselling overpriced cheap cosmetics from China. But I kept nodding with an interested look. "Sounds promising," I said. "Maybe I should think about investing." Pixie's eyes lit up and Thornton straightened in his chair. "Really?" she exclaimed. "That would be just wonderful." "Of course, I'll have to look at the business plan, the financial projections," I added. "I don't have much in savings, most of it invested in the house." Speaking of the house, Thornton intervened. Pixie and I were thinking, maybe you should consider a reverse mortgage. You could get a good amount of cash by staying here and pay off the loan. Well, later. After I'm dead is what he meant. You could pull a few $100,000 out of a $2 million house with a reverse mortgage, enough to cover their debts and buy a new apartment, maybe even a house. That's an interesting thought, I said. I didn't know you knew about such financial instruments. Thornton was embarrassed. I was just exploring my options. For your benefit, of course. Of course, I repeated. You know, I was talking to my lawyer the other day about this sort of thing. He mentioned that you need a medical certificate of capacity for these transactions. After my heart attack, you know. It was another lie, but I wanted to see their reaction. And it was telling. They exchanged glances again, but this time they were worried. You're perfectly fine, Pixie said quickly. Any doctor will tell you that. I hope so, I smiled. What if I offered you another option? I could just give you some money for business development. Say $20,000? Without all the hassle of a house. Pixie looked disappointed, but quickly pulled herself together. Monsieur Martin, that would be very generous of you, Reuben. Thornton nodded, but I could see he wasn't satisfied. $20,000 was a drop in the ocean of their debts. I'll think about it, I said. Send me your business plan, will you? After they left, I sat down and wrote down everything I'd learned and suspected. Thornton and Pixie were in a deep financial hole. They needed money, lots of money, and as soon as possible. And they were targeting my house. The question was exactly how they planned to get it. A reverse mortgage? Maybe, but that would only give them a fraction of the value of the house. No, they wanted the whole house. And to do that, they either had to convince me to sell it and give them the money or wait for me to die and inherit it. I decided it was time to update my will, for real, and install security cameras in the house, just in case. For the next 2 weeks, Thornton called me almost every day, asking if I'd thought about their proposal. I told him I was still considering my options and that my lawyer was advising me to take my time. In the meantime, I hired a real lawyer and made a new will in which most of my assets, including the house, went to an animal welfare fund. Mabel had always loved cats. I left a token amount of $1,000 to Thornton. I also began to notice strange things. Twice when I came home from the store, I found signs that someone had been in the house. Nothing was missing, but things were not quite in their proper places. Once I found that the file drawer in my office was ajar, even though I remembered exactly that I had closed it. They were looking for something. The deeds to the house, my will. I started keeping the most important papers in a safe at the bank and left the older, irrelevant versions at home. Then one day I got a strange call from the notary's secretary, Miss Hope, whom I knew. She had handled the paperwork when Mabel and I bought the house. Mr. Fielding, I just wanted to confirm your appointment for tomorrow at 11 o'clock. An appointment, I interjected. I hadn't made any appointments. There was a pause. And that's odd, she said. I have it on record that you're here to sign the deed to your house. I felt my back grow cold. Transfer to who? Your grandson, Thornton Fielding, and his wife, Pixie Fielding. They said you've decided to give it to them, retaining the right to live in it for life. That's it. That's how they decided to do it. Forge the deeds. Maybe even forge my signature or hire someone to pretend to be me. Ms. Hope, I said slowly. I didn't plan any of this. This meeting has been arranged without my knowledge or consent. Oh, she sounded embarrassed. I apologize for the inconvenience. I will inform Mr. Baxter that there has been a mistake. No, I said quickly. Don't cancel the meeting. Just, don't tell them I called. I want to check something out. She paused, clearly hesitant. Mr. Fielding, if this is some kind of misunderstanding. This is not a misunderstanding, Miss Hope. This is an attempted fraud, and I'm going to stop it. After talking to Miss Hope, I couldn't sleep all night. I tossed and turned in bed, going over the details of what I'd learned. My own grandson was planning to steal my house. The house where I'd lived for almost 40 years, where Mabel and I had raised Brent, where all our memories were kept. In the morning, I called my new lawyer, Mr. Oswald. He was young, about 35 years old, no more, but with a reputation as a bulldog when it came to client advocacy. I told him about Miss Hope's call and my suspicions. "This is a serious accusation, Mr. Fielding," he said after a long pause. "Are you sure your grandson is capable of such a thing?" "Quite sure," I answered without hesitation. "The question is, what do we do next? If you're right and they really are trying to take your property illegally, we can file a police report. But we need proof." Proof. Yeah, without it, it'd just be an old man's word against his young, caring grandsons. Who's going to believe who? Some. "I want to catch them red-handed," I said. "Right in the notary's office." Mr. Oswald was silent, thinking about the situation. "It's risky, but it could work. You need to record everything on a tape recorder, and I need to be there with you." We agreed to meet half an hour before the appointed time near the notary's office. As I hung up the phone, I felt a rush of adrenaline. It had been a long time since I had felt that hunting excitement that used to be part of my job. But before that, I needed more information. I decided to follow Thornton and Pixie to see how far they were willing to go. I knew their address, the house of Pixie's parents in Woodland Hills. An unassuming two-story mansion with pretensions to luxury, but with obvious signs of neglect. Around noon, I parked on a nearby street and waited. An hour later, Thornton's black Lexus showed up. My grandson got out of the car in the company of a middle-aged man I didn't recognize. They were talking animatedly about something, and the stranger was holding some kind of file folder. I took some pictures on my phone and tried to see what the papers were, but the distance was too great. The man stayed in the house and Thornton left a half hour later. I decided to follow him. He drove to the mall and spent about an hour there. I followed him at a safe distance, trying not to attract attention. Then he went to some office in the business district. Judging by the sign on the door, it was a small law firm called Griffin and Associates. Interesting. Thornton came out of there 40 minutes later looking pleased. I took a picture of the building and wrote down the address. It might come in handy later. Back home, I called my old colleague Winston Price. We had worked together at the insurance company, and although he had been retired for 10 years, Winston kept in touch in certain circles. "Winston, I need information on the law firm of Griffin and Associates. Is there anything you can find out?" "Reuben, how many years? How many winters?" He laughed. "Are you investigating someone again?" "You could say that. Family business." Winston didn't ask too many questions. One of the reasons we always got along. "Give me a couple hours. I'll see what I can find." In the meantime, I decided to deal with the security cameras in the house. I'd already installed two, one in the living room and one in my office, but decided to add one in the hallway as well. They were discreet, disguised as ordinary furnishings, and recorded video when motion was detected. Reviewing the footage over the past week, I discovered what I suspected. Thornton had been coming into the house when I wasn't there. He had a spare key, which I gave to Brent just in case. The footage showed him rummaging through my papers, taking pictures of documents on his phone, examining desk drawers. Winston called me back that evening. "Your Griffin and Associates isn't the cleanest company, Reuben. 3 complaints to the bar in the last 2 years. Specialize in real estate deals, but mostly shady ones. One of the partners, Lester Griffin, was suspended 5 years ago for forgery." Exactly what I expected to hear. "Thank you, Winston. You've been a big help. Be careful, old man. Whatever you do, don't forget your heart." I promised to be careful, even though I was seething with anger inside. Thornton hadn't just gone behind my back. He'd gotten involved with some downright crooked lawyers. This was no longer just a family quarrel, but a real crime. The next day, I decided to take a chance and call Thornton. "Hey, Grandpa." He answered after the third ring, in an overly cheerful voice. "How's it going?" "All right," I said. "Listen, I've been thinking about your offer on the house. Why don't you come over tonight and we'll talk about it?" There was a short pause. I can't tonight, Grandpa. I have an important work meeting. How about tomorrow?" Of course he had an important meeting with a notary to steal my house. "Sure, tomorrow would be fine too," I agreed easily. "What time is convenient for you?" "How about after lunch? 3 o'clock? Perfect. That will give me time to meet Mr. Oswald, visit the notary, and get home before Thornton suspects anything amiss." "It's a deal. See you tomorrow, Thornton." That evening, I was sitting in the backyard watching the sunset and thinking about my plan when I heard voices from the neighboring property. My neighbors Paul and Angie Carmichael were hosting guests on their patio. I don't usually eavesdrop on other people's conversations, but when I heard Thornton's name, I couldn't resist listening. Reuben's grandson, yes, Angie said, came by last week, asked if we'd noticed anything strange about his grandfather's behavior. Said he was worried about his sanity. And what did you tell him? Asked a man's voice I didn't recognize. That Reuben was perfectly fine, of course, Angie said indignantly. We've known him for 20 years, and he's as sane as anyone on this street. That boy is up to something, I'm sure of it. My hands clenched into fists. So not only has Thornton been going through my papers and preparing false documents, he's also been trying to convince the neighbors that I'm losing my mind. It's a classic move for those who want to manipulate elderly relatives. Make the people around them think the old man is out of his mind and needs care. I went back into the house and checked my email. Among the spam and newsletters, I found an email from an unfamiliar address marked urgent. When I opened it, I saw scans of medical records, my medical records from the clinic where I was seen after my heart attack. But something about them didn't seem right. I looked through the papers carefully and realized some of the diagnoses had been changed, where the original had read, patient in stable condition, cognitive function intact. It now read, signs of cognitive decline, possible early-stage dementia. The letter was accompanied by a short message. The documents are ready as agreed. The remainder of the amount, after the transaction is finalized. LG, Lester Griffin. Thornton somehow accessed my medical records and forged them with the help of a rogue lawyer. This isn't just fraud anymore. It's a well-planned crime. I forwarded the letter to Mr. Oswald with a short comment. Here's your proof. Meet me tomorrow as agreed. In the morning, I awoke at first light, feeling strangely calm. I was no longer angry with Thornton and Pixie, only a cold determination to expose them. I prepared the tape recorder, checked that it worked, and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. At 10:30, I met Mr. Oswald at a cafe near the notary's office. He went over the materials I'd gathered: photographs, camera footage, forged medical records. This is serious evidence, Mr. Fielding, he said, looking at it carefully. Enough to charge you with fraud, trespassing, and forgery. Are you sure you want to take this to trial? This is your family, after all. They stopped being my family the moment they decided to steal my house, I replied firmly. I want them to answer for their actions. Mr. Oswald nodded. Then let's proceed as planned. I'll be waiting in the car in front of the office. As soon as you give the signal, I'll go in. At 11 o'clock, I entered the modest building that housed the notary's office. Miss Hope saw me and raised her eyebrows in surprise. Mr. Fielding? Are you here after all? Yes, and I'd like to speak to Mr. Baxter before the meeting if possible. She ushered me into the notary's office, an elderly man with attentive eyes behind thick glasses. I'd known him for years, though we hadn't spoken since we'd bought the house. Mr. Fielding, good to see you. He shook my hand. What can I do for you? Mr. Baxter, I'm here about a meeting that's scheduled for 11 o'clock, but I must warn you I didn't make the appointment, and I don't plan to pass my house on to my grandson. The notary frowned. But your grandson has provided documents confirming your will, and a medical report that you need help with the administration of the estate. Those documents are forged, I said firmly. I have proof, and I want to catch them red-handed. I explained my plan to him. Mr. Baxter was hesitant at first, but when I showed him the forged medical records and pictures of Thornton going through my papers, he agreed to help. This is a serious crime, he said grimly. I can't turn a blind eye to something like this. We agreed that he would conduct the meeting as usual, allowing Thornton and the man who was supposed to be impersonating me to present their fake IDs. I would then go in and expose them. I left the office and hid in the adjoining meeting room, leaving the door slightly ajar so I could see the reception area. At precisely 11 o'clock, Thornton and Pixie appeared. My grandson was dressed in a business suit, a rare sight. Pixie, too, looked unusually modest, in a simple dark blue dress, her hair in a bun. With them was a man in his 60s, with gray hair and glasses, apparently the same man who was supposed to be impersonating me. Mr. and Mrs. Fielding, come in. Miss Hope greeted them with a professional smile. Mr. Baxter is waiting for you? They passed into the notary's office without noticing me. I followed them cautiously, stopping at the door so I could hear their conversation. "Good afternoon, Mr. Baxter." Thornton's voice sounded confident. This is my grandfather, Reuben Fielding, and my wife, Pixie. We're here as agreed to process the transfer of ownership of the house. Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you, the stranger said with an accent that sounded nothing like mine. I have decided to transfer the house to my grandson, leaving the right of residence to myself. At my age, it's hard to manage such a large property. I understand, Mr. Baxter said nonchalantly. Do you have any proof of your identity, Mr. Fielding? Of course, the impostor replied, and from the sounds of it began rummaging through his briefcase. Here's my driver's license and passport. I heard, Mr. Baxter examining the documents. It's all in order. Now let's look at the property transfer documents. I've prepared everything you need, Thornton intervened. Here's the deed of gift, my grandfather's medical report, and his written consent to the transfer of the house. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I turned on the recorder in my pocket and opened the office door. Didn't expect to see me here? I asked as I entered the room. Thornton and Pixie's faces turned pale in synchronization. The impostor, who was impersonating me, froze with his mouth open. Mr. Baxter, to his credit, kept an unperturbed expression on his face. Grandfather? Thornton almost squeaked. What are you doing here? I came to stop you from stealing my house, I answered calmly. And just in time, by the looks of it. Pixie was the first to come to her senses. Reuben, there's been a misunderstanding, she began with a fake smile. We just wanted to help with the paperwork and… Shut up, I cut her off. I know everything. About the fake medical reports, about how you went through my papers, about your conversations with neighbors about my alleged dementia. It's all recorded, photographed, and documented. I looked at the impostor, who began to slowly retreat toward the door. And you, sir, I believe, are Lester Griffin, the same lawyer who has already been temporarily disbarred for document fraud? The man froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Never mind, the police will figure it out, I said, and nodded to Mr. Baxter, who was already dialing a number on his phone. Thornton jumped up from his chair. Grandpa, wait. Let's talk. There's no need to involve the police. This is a family matter. Family? I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. You call this a family matter? You tried to steal my house, spread rumors about my incapacity, falsified my medical records. This is not a family matter, Thornton. This is a felony. Pixie began to cry. Crocodile tears, I was sure. We were desperate, Reuben, she sobbed. We had huge debts. We'd been evicted from our apartment. Thornton's parents refused to help. And you decided the best way out was to steal from the old man? I shook my head. Instead of just showing up and honestly asking for help? You wouldn't have helped, Thornton muttered. You never have. You're right, I agreed. I wouldn't have given you the house. But I could help you with the debt if you were honest with me. Now, I spread my hands. Now you'll have to explain yourself to the police. At that moment, Mr. Oswald, my lawyer, entered the office. The police are on their way, Mr. Fielding, he said. I suggest that everyone remain where they are until they arrive. Thornton turned even paler, if that was possible. Who is it? He asked in a trembling voice. That's my lawyer, I answered. A real lawyer, with a valid license and an impeccable reputation. Unlike yours. Pixie had stopped crying and was now looking at me with undisguised hatred. You're going to regret this, she hissed. We're your family, the only family you have left. No, I shook my head. You're not my family. My family wouldn't do this to me. I looked at my watch. The police were supposed to arrive any minute. The plan had worked even better than I'd expected. I had all the evidence of their crime, witnesses, and a tape recording of their confession. Now all I had to do was wait for justice to be served. But looking at the twisted faces of Thornton and Pixie with fear and anger, I felt no triumph, only weariness and deep sadness. How had we gotten to this point? How had my own grandson turned into a man willing to steal from his grandfather? But this was no time for sentimentality. I straightened my back and prepared to give my statement to the police. I had protected my home and my dignity, and it was worth the effort. The police arrived faster than I expected. Two officers, a middle-aged man with a tired look, and a young woman with her hair in a tight bun, entered the notary's office while Thornton was still trying to change my mind. "Grandfather, listen. This is all a big misunderstanding." His voice shook. "We just wanted to help you with the paperwork." "Agora Hills Police Department," the senior officer interrupted him, showing his badge. "Officer Reeves, we got a call about an attempted fraud." Mr. Oswald immediately stepped forward, introduced himself as my attorney, and briefly explained the situation. As they talked, I watched Thornton and Pixie. My grandson looked like a cornered animal, pale with running eyes. Pixie, on the other hand, seemed collected and cold. She was whispering something in the ear of the fake Reuben Fielding, who was now sitting in a corner, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. The officers recorded the statements of everyone present. I provided them with a tape recording made in the office, as well as photographs and other evidence collected. Mr. Baxter confirmed that the meeting had been arranged without my knowledge and showed the forged documents that Thornton and his accomplices had brought. When it came to detention, the imposter who was supposed to pose as me suddenly became talkative. "I was just doing the job I was paid to do," he said, pointing at Thornton. "This young man hired me through Lester Griffin. Said his grandfather couldn't come in person due to health problems, but agreed to the transfer of the house. I didn't realize I was participating in a fraud." Thornton turned black with rage. "Shut up, you old idiot," he yelled. "Nobody asked you to open your mouth." Officer Reeves immediately stepped between them. "Calm down, Mr. Fielding. You're only making your situation worse." Eventually, Thornton, Pixie, and the imposter, who turned out to be a retired actor named Hugh Lambert, were taken to the station for further questioning. I was asked to come back later to give a formal statement. Mr. Oswald insisted on accompanying me. As the police led the crooks away, there was silence in the notary's office. Mr. Baxter took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. "Mr. Fielding, I am very sorry that you have had to face such a betrayal by your family," he said gently. "Thank you for your help," I replied. "I couldn't have caught them without you. I was only doing my duty." He shook his head. "In 40 years as a notary, I've seen a lot of family dramas, but this is out of line." Mr. Oswald and I left the office. The day was surprisingly clear and warm for mid-May. I inhaled deeply, feeling strangely light. The tension of the last few weeks was beginning to release me. "You handled yourself well out there, Mr. Fielding," my lawyer said. "Not everyone could expose their own family in cold blood. They stopped being my family the moment they decided to steal my house." I repeated a phrase I'd said to him before, but now it lacked conviction. Despite everything, Thornton was still my son's son, my grandson, the boy I had once held in my arms. Mr. Oswald seemed to notice my confusion. "Look, it's unlikely they'll face serious jail time if it's a first offense. Probably probation, community service, a fine. But the important thing is, now they know you're not defenseless. They'll think twice before trying something like that again." I nodded, not quite sure if that was any consolation. I had won the battle, but at what cost? "I'll take you home," Mr. Oswald offered. "Tomorrow we'll go down to the station to testify. I suggest you get a good night's rest." He dropped me off at my house and drove away, promising to pick me up at 9 o'clock in the morning. I walked into the empty house and felt more alone than ever. I turned on the TV just for background noise and sat in my chair, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. A phone call snapped me out of my reverie. It was Brent, my son. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" He sounded both angry and confused. "I just got a call from Pixie at the police station. She says you accuse them of fraud?" "I didn't accuse them. I caught them red-handed," I replied calmly. "They were trying to illegally take possession of my house with forged documents." There was a pause. "Was it true?" Brent finally asked, and I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Thornton says it's all a misunderstanding, that you and he discussed the possibility of remortgaging the house, and he was just acting on your request. Typical Thornton, turning everything upside down." "That's a lie, Brent. I have proof. Taped conversations, photographs, witnesses. Your son hired an actor to pretend to be me in front of a notary. He falsified my medical records to make me look incompetent." "Jesus," Brent breathed out. "I can't believe this." "Believe it, and come down to the police station tomorrow at 10 if you want to hear it firsthand." After talking to my son, I felt drained. The whole situation was exhausting, not so much physically as emotionally. I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the look on Thornton's face when I walked into the notary's office, about how Pixie had tried to manipulate me with her tears, about how far those two could have gone if I hadn't exposed them in time. In the morning, I woke up to the doorbell ringing. Brent stood on the doorstep, looking like he'd been up all night. "Can I come in?" he asked. "We need to talk before you go to the station." I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. We walked to the kitchen where I poured us both coffee. Brent sat down at the table, twirling his cup in his hands, hesitant to start a conversation. "I talked to Thornton," he said at last. "On the phone from the station. He confessed. Not right away, but when I pushed." Brent looked up at me exhausted. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know he was planning something like that. I swear, I believed him. Brent could be a complicated man, but he was never dishonest." "I know," I replied. "It's not your fault." He said he and Pixie were in debt up to their eyeballs, that they were about to go to jail for defaulting on their loans, that they were facing bankruptcy. Brent shook his head. "But that's no excuse for what they were trying to do." "No, it's no excuse," I agreed. "What are you going to do?" Brent asked. "Are you really going to sue them?" I wondered. Revenge had never been my goal. I just wanted to protect myself and my home. "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly. "But I want them to learn a lesson. I want them to realize that you can't do that to people, even if they're old people who they think have one foot in the grave." Brent nodded. "I understand. I'll support whatever you decide. They deserve to be punished." That was unexpected. I thought Brent would protect his son no matter what. "Thank you," I said, and we finished our coffee in silence. Mr. Oswald arrived at 9, and we went to the police station. Brent drove himself. Detective Morales, a short, energetic man with a shrewd eye, met us at the station. "Mr. Fielding, thank you for coming," he said as he led us into a small interview room. "We have some questions for you about the attempted fraud case." I told him everything from the beginning, about Thornton's strange behavior, about his sudden interest in my home and health, about overheard conversations and evidence found. The detective listened attentively, making occasional notes. "So you deliberately set a trap," he said when I was done. "A risky move, but effective," Mr. Oswald said. Detective Morales shrugged. I couldn't agree more. "Your evidence is very compelling, Mr. Fielding. We've already questioned all 3 of the detainees. The actor, Mr. Lambert, immediately cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. He corroborated your story and gave details of his employment." "And Thornton and Pixie?" I asked. "At first they denied everything, claiming they were acting with your consent, but when we presented them with the evidence and Mr. Lambert's testimony," the detective allowed himself a slight smile. "They changed their story. Now they admit the facts but insist they acted in good faith, wanting to protect you from yourself." "Protect me?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "By stealing my house? They claim that you are incapacitated and unable to adequately manage your assets," the detective continued. "That after the heart attack, you began to have problems with your memory and judgment. That you'd asked them to help you with the paperwork, and now you'd forgotten about it." I shook my head. Even now, caught red-handed, they continued to lie and manipulate. "Do you have any medical documentation to prove you're normal?" the detective asked. "Yes," I answered. "The results of my last examination, conducted a month after the heart attack. No cognitive impairment was found." "That's great. That'll be useful for the case." He made another note. "Now for the next steps. We'll be charging all 3 participants in the scheme. Mr. Lambert with accessory to fraud, your grandson and his wife with attempted fraud, forgery, and trespassing. We'll also be contacting the bar about Lester Griffin, who appears to be involved in this case." "What kind of punishment are they facing?" I asked. "That's for the court to decide, but for your grandson and his wife, if it's their first offense, it's likely to be probation, community service, and a hefty fine. Possibly a short jail sentence, but no more than a year." I nodded. That seemed fair. "We'd like you to attend the preliminary hearing," the detective continued. "They'll be held in 3 days. We'll have all the necessary documents ready by then. After the formalities were completed, We left the room. In the hallway, I saw Brent waiting by the coffee machine. "How did it go?" he asked. "It was fine," I replied. "They're going to be charged. They'll probably get probation and a fine." Brent nodded, accepting the news. Can I see Thornton?" he asked uncertainly. Sure, replied Detective Morales, who had followed us out. "He's in the holding room. I can arrange a brief meeting." Brent looked at me as if asking for permission. "Go ahead," I said. "He is your son, after all." When Brent left with the detective, Mr. Oswald offered to drive me home. "I think we've had enough excitement for today," he said. "You should get some rest before the hearing." I agreed, feeling tired. Too many emotions for one day. At home, I sat in a chair and stared out the window. The day was in full swing. The neighborhood kids were playing outside. Someone was mowing the lawn. Normal life went on. And my family had just completely fallen apart. The phone rang. It was Brent. "Dad," I talked to Thornton. His voice sounded strained. He said something you need to know." "What was that?" I asked, feeling a new wave of anxiety. "He said it was Pixie's idea, that she'd found this lawyer, Griffin, that she'd convinced him that you'd never find out, and that if you did, you wouldn't be able to prove anything anyway because of your age, that you'd be better off in a nursing home where you'd be taken care of." "And you believe that nonsense?" I asked. "No," Brent answered firmly. "I know my son. He could have come up with a scheme like this on his own without any help. He was always looking for the easy way out, always wanted to get everything at once without having to work for it." That was true. Thornton was never known for hard work or patience. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Brent was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, Dad. He's my son after all. But what he did..." He took a deep breath. "I can't just let it go. I can't pretend it didn't happen. I'll talk to a lawyer about bail, but I won't help him pay the fine. Let him learn to take responsibility for his actions." That was more than I expected from Brent. "Thank you," I said. I'm sorry I dragged you into this." "You didn't," he countered. "Thornton got us all into this with his greed and stupidity." He was quiet for a moment. Mom. "I'll stop by tomorrow, okay? I'll check on you." We said goodbye and I hung up the phone. Strangely, I felt some kind of relief. Maybe something good would come out of this horrible experience. Maybe Brent and I could finally find common ground after so many years of strained relationships. I went to the window and took a long look at my garden, the rose bushes Mabel had planted, the old apple tree that provided shade on hot days, the lawn I still mowed myself despite my age. This was my home, my world, and I protected it as I should have. The next day was the preliminary hearing. Thornton and Pixie looked frazzled after a night in the cell. Pixie was no longer trying to act remorseful. She was looking at me with unconcealed hatred. Thornton, on the other hand, seemed broken and depressed. The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, listened carefully to the charges and evidence. "This is a serious case," she said, addressing the defendants. "Attempting to defraud an elderly relative, forging documents, entering someone else's home without permission. If it hadn't been for Mr. Fielding's intervention, you might have put a roof over his head." She looked sternly at Thornton and Pixie. "I set bail at $25,000 each. The next hearing will be in 2 weeks." When the meeting was over, Mr. Oswald took me aside. "You did well, Mr. Fielding," he said, "but there's a long trial ahead. Are you sure you want to go through with it?" I looked at Thornton, who was being led back to his cell. He gave me one last glance. No remorse, no shame, just calculation. He was obviously thinking something over, planning his next move. "Yes," I answered firmly. "I want to see this thing through. They must realize that you cannot try to deceive a man with impunity just because he is old." Mr. Oswald nodded. "Then we will fight it. And believe me, we will win this case." I knew he was right. We had all the evidence, the witnesses, the confessions of accomplices. Thornton and Pixie would get what they deserved for trying to steal my house. But as I left the courthouse, I felt no triumph, only fatigue and a strange emptiness. I had defended my home, but I had lost my family. Although, to be honest, did I really have one? Maybe what had happened just ripped off the mask and showed the true face of a relationship that had long been fake. At home, I was surprised to find Brent sitting on my doorstep with a bottle of whiskey. "Thought we could both use a drink," he said with a wry smile. We sat down on the veranda, as we had long ago, when Brent was a teenager and I was a young father trying to connect with him. Thornton couldn't make bail, Brent said, looking down at his glass. He doesn't have that kind of money. Neither do I, frankly. I nodded. I wasn't going to help with bail, and Brent seemed to realize that. What's going to happen now, he asked. Trial, sentencing, punishment, I replied. The usual course of action. Brent took a sip of whiskey. You know, when I was a kid, I thought you were all-powerful, that you knew everything, that you could do everything. Then, of course, I grew up and realized that you were just a man with your flaws and weaknesses. But now, he shook his head, now I see you again as that invincible father from my childhood. You single-handedly uncovered an entire criminal scheme, like some detective in a movie. I chuckled. Just the old insurance investigator routine. Nothing heroic. Don't be modest. Brent raised his glass. Here's to you, Dad. Here's to showing those crooks that old age doesn't mean helpless. We clinked glasses, and I felt something warm inside me, and it wasn't whiskey. For the first time in years, Brent and I were actually talking to each other, without accusations or defense mechanisms. I'm proud of you, he said suddenly. Really proud. And in that moment, I realized that maybe not all was lost. Yes, Thornton and Pixie had betrayed me, but maybe because of that betrayal, Brent and I could finally regain what we'd once lost, and it was worth all the trials I had to go through. 3 days after the preliminary hearing, I got a call from Mr. Oswald's secretary informing me that Thornton and Pixie had posted bail. It turned out that Pixie's parents had splurged $50,000, although, according to Brent, they had refused to help them with their financial problems. I guess they don't want their daughter to go to jail, Brent said when we discussed it on the phone. By the way, they're asking to meet with you. Who? Pixie's parents? No, Thornton and Pixie. They want to talk. I said I'd pass on their request, but it's up to you. I wasn't sure I was ready to see them again so soon. The wound of betrayal was still bleeding. Why would they do that? I asked. There's no chance of us making up anyway. Brent sighed. Thornton says he wants to apologize, that he's realized his mistake, that he doesn't want his family destroyed because of his stupidity. Do you believe that? I asked bluntly. Sigh again. Honestly, I don't know. Thornton always had a knack for saying the right words when he needed something. But maybe he's really ashamed. Maybe prison made him rethink what he did. I doubted it. Thornton had only been behind bars for 3 days, hardly enough time for a deep rethinking of his life. He probably had some new scheme, some plan. I'll think about it, I said at last. But I can't promise anything. After my conversation with Brent, I sat in my chair for a long time thinking. Why would Thornton and Pixie want to meet with me? What do they want to say? Or rather, what do they want to accomplish? Mr. Oswald had warned me that they might try to get me to withdraw the charges, that they might press for pity, for family ties, for my supposed softness. But I was no longer soft. Their betrayal had hardened me, turned me to flint, and yet curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to hear what they had to say for themselves. I wanted to understand how my own grandson could do such a thing. I called Brent and told him I'd agree to a meeting, but with conditions, in a public place, during the day, and Brent had to be present. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in a shopping center in Agora Hills 2 days later. Neutral area, lots of people around. The perfect place for a potentially tense conversation. On the appointed day, I arrived 15 minutes before the meeting and chose a table in the corner from where I had a good view of the entire room. It was an old habit to always be in control, to always have a fallback option. Brent joined me 5 minutes later, glancing nervously at the front door. They'll be here soon, he said, ordering coffee for both of us. Pixie texted that they were on their way. I nodded, feeling oddly calm. I was ready for this meeting, whatever it brought. Thornton and Pixie showed up exactly at the appointed time. My grandson looked unusually modest. A simple shirt, jeans, no expensive accessories. Pixie, too, was dressed discreetly, her platinum hair gathered into a simple ponytail. They approached our table slowly, as if unsure of their right to be here. Grandfather, Thornton nodded at me. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Have a seat, I pointed to the empty chairs. They sat down across from Brent and me. Pixie ordered herbal tea. Thornton ordered black coffee. We sat in awkward silence for a few minutes, neither of us daring to start a conversation. So, I finally said, "You wanted to talk." "I'm listening." Thornton and Pixie looked at each other. It was obvious that they had rehearsed their words beforehand. "Grandfather, we want to apologize," Thornton began, looking me in the eye with an expression that must have been meant to portray genuine remorse. "What we did, it's unforgivable. We succumbed to desperation and greed, and it led us into a terrible mistake." "Mistake?" I interjected. "You call trying to steal my house a mistake?" "It wasn't a theft," Pixie quickly interjected. "We never wanted to take your home away from you, Reuben. We just wanted to help with property management while you—" "While I what?" I interrupted her. "Until I died? Or were you hoping to speed up that process?" Brent tensed beside me. Pixie turned pale. "No, not at all. We would never," she stammered. "We just thought that at your age, especially after your heart attack, it would be better if someone helped you with your finances and real estate, and that someone would have to be you." I wasn't asking, I was stating. Two people with huge debts and no steady income. Two people who falsified my medical records and hired an actor to impersonate me in front of a notary. "Yes, you seem like very trustworthy property managers." Thornton sighed. "Grandfather, we made a mistake. A terrible mistake, and we're prepared to answer for it. But do you really want us to go to jail? We're family. That's what this is. That's what this was all about. Trying to push family feelings. Family doesn't steal from each other," I said calmly. "Family doesn't lie to each other. A family doesn't betray each other." "We were desperate," Thornton stepped forward. "We had huge debts. We were being evicted from our apartment. The bank was threatening to repossess our car. We couldn't see any other way out." "You could have just asked for help," I said. "To be honest about your problems. Would you have helped?" For the first time, there was real emotion in Thornton's voice. Bitterness. "You always said that everyone should be responsible for their own actions. That you can't rely on other people's help. That I should stand on my own 2 feet. And that's why you decided to steal my house?" I shook my head. "Instead of getting a job, cutting costs, declaring bankruptcy, finally?" "We tried," Pixie exclaimed. Thornton had been looking for work for months, but no one wanted him with his track record. My business wasn't bringing in enough income. We sold almost all of our stuff, but the debts only grew because of the interest. And yet, I looked her straight in the eye, that doesn't justify what you did." There was a heavy silence. Thornton and Pixie looked at each other again, and I saw something change in their eyes. The mask of remorse began to fall away, revealing true emotion, disappointment, anger, calculation. "Listen, grandfather," Thornton lowered his voice. "I understand you're angry, but think of the consequences. If you keep pressing charges, it will destroy our family. It will affect your reputation. People will talk about you." "Threatening me?" I raised an eyebrow. "No, of course not," he retreated hastily. "I'm just saying that a public trial is not in your best interest. All this talk about your health, about your capacity, neighbors will start to question you. Maybe even social services will take an interest. Are you sure you want that?" That's it. Now I saw their real plan. They were hoping the fear of public humiliation would make me back off. "Thornton," Brent interjected, his voice sounding warning, "you're out of line." "I just want grandfather to understand the consequences of his actions," Thornton shrugged. "It's not going to be a pretty process. For all of us." Especially for you two," I said dryly, "considering that all the evidence is against you." "The evidence can be interpreted in many ways," Pixie said with sudden coldness. "For example, as evidence that an elderly man is suffering from paranoia after a heart attack and is stalking his own family who were just trying to help him." I felt anger rising inside but held it back. This was exactly what they wanted. To make me lose control, to show that I was emotionally unstable. "Interesting strategy," I said calmly. "But you're forgetting a few things. First, I have a recording of your conversation with the notary, where you represent the fake Reuben Fielding. Secondly, I have the testimony of the actor you hired. 3, I have fake medical records with your fingerprints on them. And fourth," I leaned forward, Unlike you, I'm not afraid of publicity. I have nothing to be ashamed of. Thornton and Pixie looked at each other again, this time anxiously. Their plan was clearly not working. Grandfather, we just want to find a compromise, Thornton said less confidently. Maybe we could compensate for the moral damage? Pay some kind of settlement? I laughed. With what? You don't have any money. You're up to your eyeballs in debt. The only thing you can offer me is my own house, which you tried to steal. We could work for you, Pixie suggested. Help around the house with shopping, anything. Like a form of community service. But for you personally. The idea made me uncomfortable. To imagine those two hanging around me, knowing that they were capable of betrayal. No, I said firmly. I don't want you in my house. Never. Thornton suddenly pounded his fist on the table, causing the customers at the neighboring tables to turn around. Damn it, grandfather. What do you want from us? We're trying to resolve this peacefully. We're offering apologies, compensation, our help. What more do you want? Justice, I answered simply. I want you to answer for your actions according to the law. Like all normal people. That's unreasonable, Pixie shook her head, and inhumane. You know that imprisonment will ruin our lives. We'll never be able to get a normal job with a criminal record. You should have thought about that before you decided to commit a crime, I said. Actions have consequences. Isn't that what I've always taught you, Thornton? My grandson turned pale with anger. You're just getting revenge on us. You don't care about your family. You've always cared. Thornton, stop it, Brent said sharply. You're only making things worse for yourself. You're what? Thornton turned to his father. Are you taking his side now, after everything he's done? After he practically abandoned us when Mom left? I didn't abandon you, I objected. I worked to provide for you, to make sure you had a roof over your head, food on the table, a chance to get an education. We needed a father, not an ATM, exclaimed Thornton. Thornton, Brent's voice became icy. Don't put the blame for your actions on your grandfather. You're a grown man. You made the decision to deceive your grandfather, to forge documents, to hire an actor. No one forced you to do it. I was desperate. Hassan Thornton was almost screaming. Do you have any idea what it's like when you can't pay your bills? When you get calls from debt collectors? When you get evicted from your own home? I know, I said quietly. I grew up during the Great Depression. My parents lost everything. We lived in a car for months. I started working at 12 to help support my family. And never, not once in my life, did it ever occur to me to cheat someone, to steal someone else's property. Thornton stopped talking, looking at me with a mixture of anger and surprise. I'd never told him about my childhood. To be honest, I rarely remembered those times. It was too hard to remember. It's different, he said at last. It's different now. Different standards of life. The principles are the same, I replied. Honesty, decency, respect for other people's property. That doesn't change over time. Pixie stood up suddenly. I see this conversation is pointless, she said coldly. You've already made up your mind, Mr. Fielding. You want to punish us at any cost, even if it destroys your family. You destroyed our family when you decided to deceive me, I replied. Come on, Thornton. She pulled her husband by the arm. We've done all we can. Thornton rose slowly, not looking at me. You'll regret this, grandfather, he said quietly. When you're alone in your big, empty house, when you need help and there's no one around, you'll remember this conversation. Better to be alone than with traitors, I replied. They left without looking back. Brent and I sat in silence, finishing our cold coffee. Well, Brent finally said, it was intense. They tried to manipulate me, I remarked. First through pity, then guilt, then fear of social judgment. Classic techniques. And none of them worked. Brent shook his head with a slight smile. You were always a tough nut to crack, Dad. We left the cafe and headed for the parking lot. The day was clear but cool. Typical spring weather for California. What do you think they'll do next? Brent asked as we approached the cars. It's hard to say, I shrugged. Maybe they'll try to spread rumors that I'm incapacitated, like they threatened. Maybe they'll try to bribe witnesses, or maybe they'll just hope for the mercy of the court. Are you really ready to go through with this? There was concern in Brent's voice. It could be a long and unpleasant process. I know, I nodded. Tony, but I have to do it. Not just for my own sake, but for the sake of other old people who fall victim to schemes like this. Someone has to show that we're not defenseless. Brent smiled and suddenly hugged me, for the first time in years. You're a stubborn old man, you know that? He said with warmth in his voice. But I'm proud of you. When I got home, I found that Mr. Oswald had called me. I called him back and told him about the meeting with Thornton and Pixie. They were obviously trying to get you to drop the charges, he said. And when that didn't work, they turned to threats. It's typical of this kind of thing. Do you think they'll carry out their threats? I asked. Will they start spreading rumors about my incapacity? Quite possibly, he replied. But don't worry. We have medical reports confirming your excellent cognitive condition. We have witnesses who have known you for years and can attest to your capacity. Their attempts to discredit you will only make their position in court worse. It made sense, but still the anxiety wouldn't let me go. I knew what desperate people could do, and Thornton and Pixie were just that, desperate and cornered. The next few days passed relatively quietly. I went about my usual business, talking to Brent on the phone, meeting with Mr. Oswald to discuss the upcoming trial. There was no sign that Thornton and Pixie were carrying out their threats. And then the calls started. First came my neighbor, Angie Carmichael. Reuben, darling, are you all right? She asked worriedly. I just wanted to check. I'm fine, Angie. Why do you ask? Well, your grandson came by today, told me you haven't been feeling well lately, that you've been forgetting things sometimes, getting confused about time. He looked very worried. I gritted my teeth. So Thornton had started his campaign after all. Angie, I'm fine. My grandson. We have a complicated relationship right now. He's trying to make me look incapacitated so he can get control of my house. Oh, she said quietly. I had a hunch something was wrong. You've always had a sharper mind than most people half your age. Don't worry, I won't believe such nonsense from anyone. After Angie, my old friend from the Senior Citizens Club called, then the pharmacist from whom I regularly bought my meds. Then even the mailman came by to see if everything was okay. Thornton had clearly launched a full-scale campaign, going after everyone who knew me. I called Mr. Oswald to tell him what was going on. This is out of line, he said indignantly. They're practically slandering you. We can add that to the charges. They're doing this precisely to make me look paranoid if I complain, I said. It's part of their plan. Maybe, he agreed, but we can get ahead of them. I suggest you get an independent medical evaluation, a full neurologist examination, including cognitive function tests. That will settle the question of your competency once and for all. It was a good idea. I agreed, and Mr. Oswald arranged an examination with one of the best neurologists in Los Angeles. The results, as I expected, showed that my cognitive functions were in excellent condition for someone my age, even above average. But Thornton and Pixie didn't stop at spreading rumors. One morning I discovered that someone had broken into my house during the night. Nothing was missing, but some things were out of place, and there had clearly been rummaging through papers in the study. Fortunately, I had stored all the important documents in a safe deposit box for a long time. I called the police and reported the break-in. The officer who arrived on the call inspected the house and made a report, but did not express much hope of catching the burglars. No prints, no signs of forced entry. Someone had obviously used a key. After that incident, I changed all the locks in the house and installed additional security cameras. I wasn't going to give Thornton and Pixie a chance. A week after our meeting at the cafe, I got a call from social services. Some concerned relative informed me that I was living alone, unable to take care of myself, and refusing family assistance. They wanted to do an assessment of my ability to care for myself. I invited the social worker into the home, showed them that I was doing fine with all household tasks, explained the situation with my grandson and his wife, and showed them the results of a recent medical examination. The social worker, a pretty middle-aged woman named Olivia, quickly realized what was going on. Unfortunately, Mr. Fielding, these cases are not uncommon, she said sympathetically. Some relatives try to use social services for their own ends, hoping to gain control of the elderly person's assets. But don't worry, I can see that you're doing fine on your own, and my report will make that clear. Thornton and Pixie's attacks grew more and more desperate as the trial approached. They even tried to bribe Miss Hope, the notary's secretary, by offering her money to change her testimony. Unfortunately for them, Miss Hope turned out to be an honest woman and immediately reported the matter to the police. 3 days before the trial, Brent called me with some unexpected news. "Dad, you're not gonna believe this. Thornton just sent me a text. He and Pixie are breaking up." "What?" I was stunned. "Why?" He didn't go into detail, but apparently she's blaming him for dragging her into this whole house thing. And he says it was her idea all along. They're putting the blame on each other. I wasn't surprised. Criminal partnerships rarely survive the test of failure. When a plan goes awry, everyone starts thinking about themselves. "That could work to our advantage," Brent pointed out. "If they give contradictory testimony in court, it will only strengthen our case." The news of Thornton and Pixie's separation did not bring me any satisfaction. On the contrary, I felt strangely tired, as if each new twist in the story was draining me of my last strength. But I was not going to give up. It was not in my nature to back down, especially when the truth was on my side. On the day of the trial, I woke up early before dawn. I shaved thoroughly, put on my best suit, the dark blue one I'd bought for Mabel's funeral, but never wore then, opting for black. Mabel had always said blue suited me. Strange how the memory of her came back to me at the most unexpected moments. Mr. Oswald picked me up at 8. In the car, he went over the plan of action one more time. What I should say, how to answer possible questions from the defense, how to hold myself up on the witness stand. I listened half-heartedly. In 35 years of working for an insurance company, I had testified in court hundreds of times on insurance claims. I knew how it worked. "The main thing is to tell the truth and don't be provoked," Mr. Oswald concluded as we drove up to the courthouse. "Thornton's lawyer will probably try to paint you as incompetent or vindictive. Don't react emotionally, however offensive his assumptions may be." I nodded. Emotional reactions had never been my problem. Had. Quite the opposite. Mabel often reproached me for being too reserved, for failing to express what I was feeling. Brent was waiting for us at the entrance to the courtroom. He looked tense but determined. "Thornton and Pixie are here," he said quietly, "with separate attorneys. They're not even talking to each other, so their breakup wasn't just a rumor. I wonder what happened between them. Maybe Pixie had finally realized who she'd committed her life to, or maybe Thornton had decided it would be more profitable for him to blame it on his wife. Either way, like Brent said earlier, it was playing into our hands. We entered the courtroom. Thornton sat at the defense table on the left with a young lawyer in an expensive suit. Pixie sat at a separate table on the right with a middle-aged female lawyer. They sat with their backs to each other, defiantly oblivious to each other's presence. Judge Harrison, an older woman with a shrewd eye and a stern face, quickly brought everyone up to speed and outlined the order of the hearing. The prosecutor representing the prosecution was to speak first, followed by me as the chief witness, then the other witnesses for the prosecution, including the notary and the actor Hugh Lambert. After that, the defense would have the floor. The prosecutor, Mr. Chung, presented the facts of the case clearly and methodically, supporting each statement with documentary evidence, photographs, recordings, witness statements. He emphasized the deliberate nature of the defendant's actions, their attempts to falsify medical records and make me appear incapacitated. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the stares of everyone present. Thornton's gaze was especially hard, a mixture of anger, fear, and a childish stubbornness, as if he still couldn't believe that his plan had failed. Pixie, on the other hand, was staring at the floor, avoiding meeting my eyes. I told my story, simply without emotion, sticking to the facts, about Thornton's strange behavior, about his sudden interest in my health and home, about the conversations overheard and the evidence found, how I discovered their plan and decided to catch them red-handed at the notary's office. "And how did you feel when you realized that your own grandson was trying to deceive you?" Mr. Chang asked. I thought for a moment. "Disappointment," I finally answered. Not so much anger or resentment, but deep disappointment. I thought I had raised my son better, that he in turn had raised his son with an understanding of the difference between right and wrong. Mr. Chang nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Fielding. I have no further questions." Then it was the turn of cross-examination. Thornton's attorney, a young man named Drake, approached the witness stand with a confident smile. "Mr. Fielding," he began, You mentioned that you worked as an insurance investigator. Is it true that in that job you were accustomed to suspecting people of lying and fraud? I'm used to checking facts, I replied calmly. And yes, many people do try to defraud insurance companies. So you have developed a certain suspicious of people's motives? He paused. Maybe even a certain paranoia. Objection, Mr. Chang intervened. The defense is trying to undermine the credibility of the witness with unfounded assumptions about his mental state. Sustained, Judge Harrison nodded. Mr. Drake, stick to the facts of the case. Thornton's attorney bowed slightly and changed tactics. Mr. Fielding, you claim your grandson tried to steal your house. But isn't it true that, legally, as your direct heir, he would have gotten the house anyway after your death? No, that's not true, I replied. I have a will, made long before these events, which gives my house to a charitable foundation. Thornton jerked in his seat, clearly startled by the news. So he didn't know. Apparently he assumed that as my only grandson, he would automatically inherit all my property. And when did you make this will? Mr. Drake asked, a little confused. While my wife was still alive, I answered. About 5 years ago, we both decided that we wanted our property to go to a good cause. It was a small lie I had made a new will after I had begun to suspect Thornton. But Drake couldn't have known that, and I wasn't under oath. The interrogation went on for about another hour. Thornton's lawyer tried to find contradictions in my testimony, alluded to my age and possible memory problems, even tried to make it seem as if Thornton really wanted to help me manage the estate, but I remained calm and consistent. Pixie's attorney, Mrs. Clayton, took a different line of defense. She tried to portray her client as an innocent victim of circumstance who was simply following her husband without fully understanding what was going on. Mr. Fielding, she asked, have you ever heard Pixie directly discuss a plan to take possession of your house? Or were all the conversations you overheard conducted by Thornton, I wondered. Indeed, most of the direct conversations about the house were conducted by Thornton. Pixie usually stayed in the background, though she was clearly in favor of his plans. I can't say I heard her specifically discuss the plan, I admitted, but she was present during those conversations and expressed no objections. Moreover, she was actively involved in the attempt to deceive the notary by representing the fake Reuben Fielding. Mrs. Clayton nodded, clearly unhappy with my answer, but continued on in an attempt to minimize Pixie's role in what was going on. Following my testimony, other witnesses were called. Mr. Baxter, the notary public, who corroborated my account of the events in his office. Miss Hope, who told of a strange phone call to confirm the meeting. Hugh Lambert, the actor hired to portray me, who detailed how Thornton had found him through Griffin's lawyer and offered him money for a small part. By the end of the day, the picture of the crime had become obvious to everyone present. Even Thornton and Pixie's attorneys looked dejected, realizing that their lines of defense were not working. Judge Harrison called a recess until the next day, when the defendants were to give their testimony. Brent, Mr. Oswald, and I walked out of the courtroom feeling that the day had been a success. You handled yourself very well, Mr. Fielding, Mr. Oswald said as we walked toward the parking lot. Your testimony was clear, consistent, and convincing. I think we have a very good chance of a conviction. Brent walked along silently, absorbed in his own thoughts. I knew it was a difficult ordeal for him to see his son on trial for trying to defraud his own grandfather. Are you okay? I asked when we pulled up in front of Mr. Oswald's car. Brent sighed. I don't know, Dad. It's all complicated. I know Thornton is guilty. I see the evidence. I've heard the witnesses. But he's still my son, you know. No matter how angry I get at him, no matter how disappointed I get, I can't just turn those feelings off. I get it. Of course you did. Isn't that how I've felt about Brent all these years? No matter how much we fought, no matter how far apart, he was always my son, a part of me. I know, I said quietly, and I'm not asking you to choose between us. You have to support Thornton like a father. Just don't ask me to forgive what he did. Brent nodded, grateful for the understanding. Thanks, Dad. I want you to know that I'm on your side on this one. What Thornton did was wrong, and he has to answer for what he did. We agreed to meet the next day at the courthouse, and we parted ways. Brent to his home, and Mr. Oswald and I back to Agora Hills. In the evening, sitting in my chair with a glass of whiskey, I reflected on the day, about the look on Thornton's face when I mentioned the will, about how Pixie had avoided looking me in the eye, about how easily their union had fallen apart when it was time to be held accountable for my actions. The phone rang. I expected to hear Brent or Mr. Oswald, but it was Valerie, Brent's ex-wife and Thornton's mother. "Reuben?" Her voice sounded unsure. "It's Valerie. Yeah, I heard about what happened. The trial. We hadn't spoken in over 20 years, not since she'd left Brent, leaving him with 5-year-old Thornton. She'd moved to another state, rarely called her son, and as far as I knew, had little involvement in his upbringing. "Hello, Valerie," I answered neutrally. "I haven't heard from you in a while." "Yes, a long time." She was quiet. "Reuben, I know we've never been particularly close, but what Thornton did? I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't see it coming. An apology from Valerie, with whom we've always had a strained relationship, to say the least." "Thank you," I said, not knowing what else to add. "I always knew he had problems," she continued, "even as a child. That need for attention, for recognition, that tendency to lie when he needed something. I should have spent more time with him, worked on those issues more. But I was young, selfish, thinking only of myself." Her voice shook. "And that's what it led to." "Valerie," I said more gently, "you can't blame yourself for the choices an adult makes. Thornton chose to deceive me himself. You didn't." "Maybe," she sighed. "But I can't help but think that if I'd been a better mother, things might have turned out differently." We talked some more. She told me that she lived in Portland, worked as a nurse, got married a second time, but never had any more children, that she occasionally called Thornton, but that their relationship had always been complicated and distant, that she learned what had happened from Brent, who called her after the first court hearing. "I wanted to come," she said, "to support Thornton, as disgusting as his act was, but he didn't want to see me, said he could handle it on his own. It was typical Thornton to reject help when it was really needed and demand it when it wasn't." After talking to Valerie, I felt strangely confused. It was as if everything I knew about my family, about our relationship, suddenly appeared in a new light. I had always thought Valerie had abandoned her son out of selfishness, but perhaps she had simply recognized her inability to be a good mother? I always thought Brent blamed me for the breakdown of his marriage, but maybe he just didn't know how to deal with his own pain and frustration. The next day in court, Thornton and Pixie testified. As expected, they tried to shift the blame to each other. Thornton claimed that the idea for the house was Pixie's, that she had found Griffin's lawyer and convinced him that the plan would work. Pixie, for her part, insisted that she was simply following her husband's instructions, not fully understanding what was going on. Their testimony was so contradictory that even Judge Harrison couldn't hide a skeptical smile. It was obvious that they were lying, trying to save themselves at each other's expense. After closing arguments, the judge retired to make her decision. We waited in the hallway, avoiding looking in the direction of Thornton and Pixie, who sat at opposite ends of the hall. "What do you think the verdict will be?" Brent asked quietly. "It's hard to say," replied Mr. Oswald. "All things considered, I'd guess probation, community service, and a hefty fine. Perhaps a short prison sentence, but hardly more than a few months." I nodded. I didn't need them to spend years in jail. I just wanted them to realize their actions had consequences, that you can't try to trick a man with impunity just because he's old and, in their opinion, defenseless. An hour later, we were called back into the courtroom. Judge Harrison looked serious and collected. "After considering all the evidence presented and the testimony of the witnesses," she began, "the court finds the defendants, Thornton Fielding and Pixie Fielding, guilty of attempted fraud, forgery of documents, and trespassing." She paused, looking at the defendants. "Given that this is your first offense, and considering all the circumstances of the case, the court sentences you to 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $50,000 each. In addition, the court issues a restraining order that you may not come within 100 meters of Reuben Fielding's house or contact him in any way without his express consent." Thornton turned pale when he heard the fine. $50,000 was a huge sum for him, with his financial problems. Pixie looked a little better, apparently counting on her parents for help. In addition, Judge Harrison continued, the court recommends that you both undergo psychological therapy to work through the issues that led to this crime. This is not a requirement of the sentence, but will be considered for any future offenses. After the sentence was announced, we walked out of the courtroom. I felt a strange emptiness inside. Not the joy of victory, not the satisfaction of justice served, just fatigue and a vague sense of loss. It was as if today I had finally lost not only my grandson, but a part of myself. Brent came up to me when we were already in the parking lot. Dad, I got to talk to Thornton. You understand, right? I nodded. Of course you do. He's your son. Go on. Brent paused as if he wanted to say something else, but then he just hugged me briefly, awkwardly, but sincerely, and walked back toward the courthouse. Mr. Oswald drove me home. We were silent the whole way. He, apparently sensing my mood, didn't try to start a conversation. It was not until we reached my house that he finally spoke. You know, Mr. Fielding, in my career, I've seen a lot of family dramas in court. I've often wondered how people get to this point. How do people who are close to each other hurt each other so badly? I looked at my home, quiet, peaceful, so familiar. The house where I'd lived for almost 40 years, where I'd raised my son, where I'd been happy with Mabel. A home I almost lost because of my own grandson's betrayal. I don't know, Mr. Oswald, I answered honestly. What dear? Maybe we just don't know how to really talk to each other. Maybe we take each other for granted too easily. Or maybe, I fell silent, searching for words. Maybe we're just too different to really understand each other. He nodded, accepting my answer. Either way, you did what you had to do. You protected yourself and your home, and perhaps taught your grandson a lesson that will benefit him in the long run. I doubted that, but I didn't argue. I thanked Mr. Oswald for his help, promised to contact him if there were any more problems, and went inside. In the evening, Brent called. I talked to Thornton, he said without preamble. He's not in the best of health, angry at the world, at you, at Pixie, at the court, even at me for not helping him with his bail. Will he plead guilty? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. No, Brent sighed. He thinks he was treated unfairly, that you're just getting back at him for some old grudge, that the whole world is against him. Typical Thornton, always blaming others for his problems, never taking responsibility. What about Pixie? I asked. Are they really breaking up? Yes, Brent confirmed. She's already filed for divorce. According to Thornton, she blames him for all her problems and says he ruined her life. I felt a pang of regret. Not for Thornton or Pixie, they got what they deserved, but for the way things turned out, for the fact that our family, not the strongest as it was now completely broken. Brent, I said after a pause, I want you to know that I don't hold it against you for supporting Thornton. He's your son, and you should be there for him, even if you don't approve of what he's doing. Thanks, Dad. His voice sounded tired. But honestly, I don't know how much longer I can do this. He doesn't change. He doesn't learn from his mistakes. He just finds new people to blame, new excuses. Give him time, I advised. Maybe when the first anger passes, he'll start to think more clearly. Maybe, Brent didn't sound convinced. What about you? How are you? I wondered. How was I feeling? Devastated, tired, disappointed, but also free. As if the weight I'd been carrying on my shoulders all these years, the weight of family obligations, expectations, unspoken resentments, had finally lifted. I'm fine, I replied. I just need time to process things. After talking to Brent, I went out to the backyard and sat in the old rocking chair that Mabel and I had once put under the apple tree. The sun was already setting, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance a dog was barking, and children were laughing in the neighbor's yard. Ordinary, peaceful evening life. I thought of Thornton, of him growing up, of our rare moments of intimacy when I taught him how to play baseball, when I read to him before bed, when I helped him assemble his first bicycle. I thought about Brent, about our complicated relationship, about how we gradually drifted apart after Valerie left, how we couldn't find common ground, how we'd stopped really talking. I thought about Mabel, about how she had always been the linchpin in our family, how she could soften the edges, find compromises, make us listen to each other. And I realized that I may have lost my family long before this trial. We may have all lost each other years ago, we just didn't want to admit it. It was 3 months after the trial. It had been an unusually hot summer in Agora Hills, with temperatures rising above 35 degrees almost every day, forcing residents to hide in air-conditioned houses. I spent most of my time in my garden in the early morning, when it was still relatively cool, watering the rose bushes Mabel had planted and the old apple tree that shaded my porch. Life was slowly falling into a new direction. After the whole Thornton and Pixie thing, I expected to feel emptiness, loneliness, maybe even regret. But instead I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for so long that I'd stopped noticing it. Brent called once a week, sometimes stopping by for a cup of coffee. We talked, really talked, probably for the first time in years. About his work as a civil engineer, about my life in retirement, about the books we were reading, about the news we cared about. We carefully avoided talking about Thornton, although I knew Brent kept in touch with him. One morning while going through the mail, I found a letter from the local community center. They were organizing a program to support seniors living independently and were looking for volunteers with expertise in various areas. Normally, I would throw such letters away, but this time something compelled me to read it all the way through. One of the areas of the program was counseling seniors on how to protect themselves from fraud and financial scams. Given my experience with an insurance company and recent personal experiences, I could be helpful. The idea of helping others protect themselves from similar schemes that I had encountered myself was appealing. After some thought, I decided to call the number listed. A woman who identified herself as Eleanor Reed, the program coordinator, answered the phone. Mr. Fielding, we would be very happy to have you on board, she said after hearing my story. Your experience could be extremely valuable to our clients. Unfortunately, cases of financial fraud against the elderly are becoming more and more common. We made an appointment for the next day. The community center was located in a small building near the city library, modest but well-maintained, with a wheelchair-friendly ramp and ample parking. Eleanor turned out to be an energetic woman in her 60s, with short gray hair and lively brown eyes. She walked me around the center, introduced me to the other volunteers, and told me more about the program. We offer counseling, workshops, and sometimes direct help in solving problems that have already arisen, she explained. Many elderly people fall victim to scammers precisely because they don't know their rights, don't understand how to protect themselves, or are simply embarrassed to ask for help, especially when it comes to their own relatives. I nodded, remembering how I had almost fallen victim to such a scheme myself. And how often do you encounter family fraud? I asked. When it's not strangers who are defrauded, but relatives? Eleanor sighed. More often than I'd like. According to statistics, about 60% of financial crimes against the elderly are committed by family members or close acquaintances. Especially common are cases involving real estate, houses, apartments, plots of land. Exactly what Thornton and Pixie were trying to pull off. I told Eleanor my story, about my grandson's attempt to steal my house, about the forged documents, about the trial and the verdict. You were good not to give in, she said with genuine admiration. Many people in this situation either do not notice the deception or do not dare to confront their relatives for fear of being left all alone. I had no choice, I replied. Yes, I couldn't let them get away with it. It wasn't just about the house. It was about principle. If they did it to me, they'd do it to someone else too. Eleanor nodded. That's exactly the kind of attitude we need. A willingness to stand up for justice, to help others, to share our experiences. She looked at me with a smile. What do you say, Mr. Fielding? Are you ready to join our team? I said yes, and so began my new life as a volunteer. Twice a week, I would come to the center and provide counseling to seniors concerned about possible fraud. I told them about the signs to look out for, about their rights, about how to draw up the right documents to protect themselves from unscrupulous relatives or fraudsters. Once an elderly woman, Dorothy Simmons, a widow of 78, came to me for counseling. Her daughter and son-in-law, who live in another state, had suddenly begun to take a keen interest in her 2-story home in an upscale Los Angeles neighborhood. They say they want to help me manage the property, Dorothy said. nervously fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Soon they're offering to sign the house over to them so they can protect me from scammers. But I'm not sure. They've never taken such an active interest in my affairs before. The story sounded painfully familiar. I told Dorothy about my experience, about the signs that should alert, about how to check the real intentions of relatives. The main thing is not to make hasty decisions, I advised. Shiver, do not sign any documents without consulting an independent lawyer. And remember, if you feel pressured, it's a cause for concern. Dorothy listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. After the consultation, she thanked me with tears in her eyes. You know, Mr. Fielding, I've always considered myself a reasonable woman. But when it comes to family, it's so hard to believe that your own children could be up to no good. I understand, I nodded. But remember, caring for you and trying to take over your property are different things. Real care respects your wishes and decisions. 2 weeks later, Dorothy came again, this time with a smile on her face. I took your advice, she said. I consulted a lawyer, asked my daughter directly what her intentions were, and made it clear that I wasn't going to give the house to anyone. Do you know what happened? They suddenly remembered about urgent matters and returned home earlier than planned. And yesterday my daughter called and said that she and her husband had decided to buy a house in Arizona and could no longer help me with my estate. We both laughed at such a predictable response. It was a small but important victory. Stories like this inspired me to keep working at the center. I felt that I was doing something truly useful, that my experience, even my negative experience with Thornton and Pixie, could help others avoid similar situations. Over time, I began to lead not only individual counseling sessions but also group workshops. Eleanor noticed that I was good at explaining complex legal and financial issues in simple, straightforward language and suggested that I expand my activities. You have a real talent, Reuben, she said after one of the seminars. People trust you. They see you not just as a counselor, but as someone who really understands their problems, because he has been through it himself. At one such seminar, I met Helen Brooks, a former math teacher who retired 5 years ago. She was younger than me, only 62, but she was already widowed and living alone in a small house in Woodland Hills. Helen didn't come to the seminar because she feared fraud. She wanted to better understand how to manage her finances after the death of her husband, who had always dealt with these issues. I feel completely helpless when it comes to investments, taxes, and all that, she admitted after the seminar, when we talked over a cup of tea in the center's cafeteria. John always said I was too gullible and impractical for financial matters. No one is born financially literate, I countered. It's a skill that can and should be developed, especially when you live alone. We started meeting after the seminars, first just to talk about finances, then to discuss books. It turned out we both liked detectives. And then just to have a nice conversation. Helen was an intelligent, insightful woman with a subtle sense of humor and an amazing ability to see the essence of things. You know what always struck me about people? She said one day when we were walking in a park near the center. Their ability to deceive themselves, to make excuses for the lowest acts and to believe in those excuses. Are you talking about anything in particular? I asked, intrigued by her tone. Helen sighed. About my son, to be honest. He's always getting into financial trouble, borrowing money from everyone he knows and never giving it back. And then he takes offense when he's reminded of it. And every time he has a story about an unfair boss, about a partner who set him up, about sudden medical expenses, and I'm sure he believes those stories himself. I nodded understandingly, remembering Thornton and his perpetual excuses and blame shifting. What are you doing? I asked. Now? Nothing, she shrugged. I stopped giving him money 2 years ago. I told him I could help him with job hunting, with budgeting, with anything but money. He took offense, called me a heartless mother, and didn't speak to me for 3 months. Then he came back when he needed money again. But I was adamant. How's he doing now? He got a job, moved out of the girl who was supporting him, started paying off his debts. Helen smiled. Sorry. It turns out he's quite capable of taking care of himself when there's no other option. Her story gave me hope that maybe Thornton would grow up someday and learn to take responsibility for his actions. But I wasn't going to wait for that moment or contribute to it in any way. Our paths had diverged, and I saw no point in trying to put them back together again. Helen and I were growing closer. She often came to visit me in Agora Hills, helping me with the garden. It turned out she had a real talent for gardening. I, in turn, helped her with her finances, taxes, investments. We could talk for hours about anything, or just sit in silence on my veranda watching the sunset. One evening when we were having dinner at my house, Helen suddenly asked, "Reuben, have you ever thought about giving Thornton a second chance?" I slowly put down my fork and thought about it. It was a question I'd asked myself more than once in the last few months. I answered honestly. But each time I came to the same conclusion. He had to earn this chance himself, to show that he's changed, that he's realized his mistakes. Not just expect me to forgive and forget just because we're related. Helen nodded. I understand. And I admire your toughness. A lot of people in your position would just give up and let him back into their lives for fear of loneliness or social judgment. Maybe I would have done that before, I admitted. But this whole story, it changed me. Made me realize that I don't have to tolerate betrayal just because it comes from family. And you're right, Helen covered my hand with hers. A real family doesn't betray. Real family supports, respects, cares, and sometimes we find true family not in those we're related to by blood, but in those we choose. Her words touched me to the core. That's what I found these past few months. A new family. Not by blood, but by spirit. Eleanor, Dorothy, the other volunteers and clients at the center, and of course Helen. All of these people have become closer to me than Thornton ever was. A week after that conversation, I called Mr. Oswald to set up an appointment. It was time to finally get my affairs in order, including my will. Mr. Oswald met me in his office, a spacious, bright room overlooking the city park. Mr. Fielding, it's good to see you. He shook my hand. I understand you want to amend your will? Yes, I nodded. I want to make it clear so that there is no room for dispute or manipulation after my death. We sat down at the table and I outlined my wishes. I wanted to leave most of my assets, including the house, to a community center to establish a fund to support elderly victims of financial fraud. Some of the money was to go to Brent. Despite all our difficulties, he was still my son and deserved his share of the inheritance. Some of my personal belongings, including my book collection and antique clocks, I bequeathed to Helen, someone who had become really close to me in a short time. Thornton and Pixie were not mentioned in the will at all. No token sums, no personal effects, nothing. I didn't want them to get anything from me, not out of revenge, but simply because they didn't deserve it. Are you sure you want to exclude your grandson completely? Mr. Oswald asked, taking notes. It might give him grounds for contesting the will after your death. I am sure, I answered firmly, and I want it to be clearly stated in the will that I made this decision in my right mind, with full knowledge of all the circumstances and consequences. If necessary, I am willing to undergo a medical examination to prove my capacity. Mr. Oswald nodded. Good. I will prepare all the necessary paperwork. I also recommend that you record a video statement explaining your decisions. This is an additional defense against possible attempts to contest the will. I agreed, and a few days later, I returned to Mr. Oswald's office to sign a new version of the will and record the video message. Standing in front of the camera, I explained my decisions clearly and concisely, emphasizing that they were made without any outside pressure, in full awareness of their significance. I exclude my grandson, Thornton Fielding, from inheritance, not out of revenge for his attempt to deceive me, but because I believe that inheritance is not a birthright, but an expression of trust and respect. Thornton had shown by his actions that he deserved neither. After all the formalities were completed, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the last unfinished question of my life had finally been answered. Now I could move on without looking back at the past, without worrying about my property going to the people who had tried to steal it in my lifetime. That evening, Helen and I sat on my veranda watching the sunset. I told her about the new will, about the video message, about my feelings about it all. You made the right choice, she said, squeezing my hand. And you know what? I'm proud of you. A lot of people just give up, compromise their principles to maintain the appearance of a family relationship. You stayed true to yourself. Sometimes it's not easy, I admit. especially when Brent talks about Thornton, about his new job, about the fact that he seems to be getting his life together. And do you feel a pang of regret? Helen asked softly. Not exactly regret, I struggled for words. More like sadness about what might have been if he'd chosen a different path. If he'd come to me honestly, told me his problems, asked for help instead of trying to deceive me. Helen nodded. That's a natural thing to do. But remember, you haven't closed the door for good. If Thornton ever really changes, if he comes to you with genuine remorse, not to get something, but just to right a wrong, you can always reconsider. Maybe, I agreed. But I won't wait for that moment or hope for it. I have a different life now, different priorities. And it was true. My life had changed dramatically in the last few months. I went from a lonely retiree whose days were filled with routine and memories to an active, in-demand person with new goals and new relationships. Working at the community center gave me a sense of significance, an opportunity to use my experiences, even negative ones, to help others. I saw how my advice and support changed people's lives, how they gained confidence and the ability to advocate for themselves. And my relationship with Helen. It was different from Mabel, less passionate, more calm and rational, but it had its own depth and beauty. We had both lived long enough to appreciate the simple pleasures, quiet evenings with a good book, walks in the park, sincere conversations about everything in the world. The day after the probate, I held my usual seminar at the community center. The topic was a familiar one, signs of financial fraud and how to protect yourself. I talked about the various schemes that fraudsters use, gave examples from my practice as an insurance investigator, and of course, shared my personal experiences. The most important thing you should remember, I said in conclusion, looking at the attentive faces of listeners, no one has the right to dispose of your property without your explicit consent. Not your children, not your grandchildren, not your other relatives. It is your life, your home, your money, and only you decide what to do with it. After the seminar, I was approached by an elderly woman I had not seen before. She introduced herself as Martha Jenkins. Mr. Fielding, I want to thank you, she said, shaking my hand. Your story has given me the strength to stand up to my daughter, who has been trying to convince me to sell the house and move in with her for 6 months. I now realize I have the right to say no, even if she gets offended and says I don't trust her. I'm glad I could help, I replied sincerely. And remember, real care respects your wishes and decisions. This was my favorite phrase that I repeated at every workshop, a phrase that became a kind of mantra for many seniors who visited our center. In the evening back home, I sat in my favorite chair on the veranda, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The garden that Helen and I had tidied up looked magnificent. The rose bushes were in bloom, the apple trees provided thick shade, the lawn was neatly trimmed. I thought about my life, the path I'd traveled, the decisions I'd made. About Mabel, who always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. About Brent, with whom we were finally starting to find common ground. Thornton, whose betrayal, oddly enough, had opened a new chapter in my life. I felt no bitterness or regret, only the quiet certainty that I had done the right thing, that I had protected myself and my dignity, that I had found a new meaning in life, new people who valued me not for my house or my money, but for who I was. Tomorrow I had a meeting scheduled with the mayor of the city who was interested in our program and wanted to discuss expanding it to other community centers. The day after tomorrow was dinner with Helen at a new restaurant that had opened nearby. And on Sunday, Brent and I were going to a baseball game for the first time in many years. Life went on, and it was full of new opportunities, new relationships, new goals. Without betrayal, without manipulation, without the toxic connections that had poisoned my existence before. I looked up at the sunset sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. I was free, free from fear, free from doubt, free from having to conform to someone else's expectations, free to live the life I wanted with the people I chose, doing the things I thought were important, and that was the most valuable victory I had ever won.